Good afternoon. I'm pleased today to be joined by the head of the European Medicines Agency, Emer Cooke. Emer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Janet, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I haven't had the opportunity to work with the ARM before, but I'm really looking forward to do so, and I'm very excited by the whole area of advanced therapy medicinal products.
Wonderful. Well, you have joined the agency at a truly unprecedented time in the world and have obviously had a lot to deal with. Your background is sort of robust in that you have had both industry experience and government service and association service. So you obviously bring a lot of skills to the task, but how have your first few months been?
Well, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, I have to say. I jumped right in there. I arrived on the 16th of November, which was really just after we had the first very promising results on the COVID-19 vaccines, and then a huge race to authorize them, problems of supply, a lot of visibility, which is very positive, but probably unprecedented. And as I say to many of my friends and colleagues, nobody even knew the European Medicines Agency existed, or a lot of people didn't know the European Medicines Agency existed. And now I can have a conversation with any taxi driver, any Uber, and not only do they know we exist, they know they have a view on the vaccine, they have a view on what we're doing. And yeah, it's been a very interesting couple of months, I can tell you.
I can only imagine. Well, tell me a little bit about what your vision is for the EMA and how prominent a role you expect advanced therapies to play in it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. So when I took over this job, or in fact, when I did my interview with the management board and with the European Parliament Envy Committee in June, July last year, I outlined 5 elements of my vision for the European Medicines Agency. And when I was looking back at elements of my vision, I focused on 5 challenges and opportunities. And of course, at that time, the COVID-19 crisis was I identified as the immediate challenge, but I also tried to relate it to the challenges that I saw on the availability and access to products. I identified the COVID-19 crisis, enabling innovation, ensuring patient access to products, the One Health agenda, the challenges of European telematics, and then how we support sustainability across the regulatory ecosystem. And when I think about those challenges, apart from the One Health agenda, where I was really talking about antimicrobial resistance, I can see all of these are important in how we shape the future of the regulation of advanced therapies. In particular, I would say the enabling patient access to innovative therapies it's a particular challenge for advanced therapy products. There's huge excitement around the potential, but in Europe, we've yet to see this translate into meaningful access due to many factors, but including high prices, limited reimbursement, maybe lack of knowledge, lack of information, or because the company withdraws due to lack of commercial viability. And one of my mantras is really that no matter how innovative or how basic a medicine it is of no value if it doesn't reach the patient. So this means that I place a strong focus on working closely with other stakeholders who can make sure that what we regulate actually moves on to reach patients. So working with healthcare professionals, with patients, with health technology assessment bodies, with payers, influencers such as the European Parliament, the European Commission, governments. I think working with across different stakeholders is key to helping advance the ATMP agenda.
You know, I really appreciate those comments, and the EMA has, I think, in many respects, led the way in those kind of multi-stakeholder conversations, because you're absolutely right. It would be a calamity for all of us, and obviously would not meet the goals we all set for ourselves if we're able to develop these remarkable medicines and we're not able to get them to patients. So um, thanks for those efforts, and we look forward to supporting them and helping you foster them. You know, are there other key challenges or opportunities you see for this sector in 2021 beyond kind of the access reimbursement piece you've just spoken of?
Well, there are lots of challenges, lots of opportunities. I would say that one thing we have to work on is the patient involvement in decision making. We need to look at transparency of decisions. We need to look at the whole clinical trial process and how we can make that more efficient and more attractive and appropriate, I would say, for ATMP products. International harmonization is something that will be key to moving the agenda forward in this space. And I think how we use real world evidence with the focus, and one of my particular ambitions to use more data in regulatory decision making. How can we use that for ATMP? How can we embrace data to support decision making for advanced therapy medicinal products? And I think the experience with registries, where in Europe we have registries for each of the authorized products, is very important in helping to drive the thinking forward in this area.
Yes, that is a good list of topics. So I look forward to drilling into some of those things in a little bit more detail throughout this conversation. But maybe before I do that, I'll ask you, you know, the FDA and your predecessor and our own data analysis suggests that there will be a significant number of submissions, ATMP submissions soon, and that, you know, there may be 10 or 20 new ATMP applications every year by 2025, I think is the latest estimates folks have given. Can you talk a little bit about how ready the EMA is, or how the EMA is getting ready for that influx of ATMP applications? And in particular, given, you know, you've just had to cope with a move to Amsterdam in the midst of also balancing the demands of COVID. So can you talk a little bit about that, about how ready the EMA is for the wave of ATMPs coming your way?
Well, I think we're ready. In fact, I would even say we're waiting, because we have the numbers that my predecessor anticipated haven't quite realized, but that doesn't mean we're not ready to receive them. And we have, as you know, we have our Advanced Therapy Committee, the CAT, that meets now, of course, meeting virtually on a monthly basis. I really think that the CAT can cope with more products, and we have a dedicated team at EMA to support advanced therapy medicinal products. It's not an area that's been particularly affected by COVID. So although we've had to ask the help of some of the colleagues on some of the COVID-related aspects, we still are confident that we have a fully functioning team to support the development and submission. We haven't, we did anticipate that we would lose staff as a result of Brexit. And we put in place a lot of measures to try to retain staff, to make sure we had the best expertise. We continue to have the best expertise. And I'm happy to say that now, almost, it's hard to say, but almost, I was going to say almost 2 years into our move, we're actually staffed. We've never been better staffed than before. Of course, a lot of this is going to the increased activity relating to COVID, but I can assure you that all our performance targets are being met, and that we're not seeing any delays in our other products, even though we've got an intensified effort in the area of COVID vaccines and treatments.
Wow, that's remarkable, actually. One of the kind of most pressing areas I think the sector is feeling when it comes to regulatory challenges for the field are challenges around CMC regulation. And we've seen a number of significant delays in the United States over CMC related issues. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts about overcoming CMC challenges, and maybe as part of that answer, you could tell us a little bit about the PRIME toolbox and its origins?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that the type of developers of advanced therapy medicinal products are not normally used to the way that the development processes for, let's call them traditional medicines and biologicals. So the rigor behind consistency, potency assurances, comparability, even good manufacturing practices. It's not the world that a lot of our developers are coming from. So I think it's inevitable that we will have some challenges there. And it is certainly where we see the most challenges from the EMA perspective. Most of the issues that are coming up in the CMC side. But we put in place the PRIME, or the Priority Medicine Scheme, which is a little bit like the breakthrough designation in the US, or the Sakigake in Japan. And it's really designed to help guide developers who may not be familiar with the European framework through the processes. And our message really is come early, come often, and we will, if you meet the criteria for PRIME designation, if it's an unmet medical need, we will allocate a specific team to a specific and amplified team to help developers through the process, to look at the data that they have, to see, well, could it be, how much it might need to be adapted to ensure that it would meet the standards and criteria that we would expect. So that's that's a very important message we'd like to give. I was trying to find some figures on PRIME. I think we've had something over 350 applications, and in terms of the numbers that we've seen for PRIME, 323 applications in 5 years. So that's from 2016 up to the end of 2020. And then if I look at that from the perspective of ATMPs, we had 94 ATMPs applying for PRIME. So 29% of our PRIME requests are for ATMPs. And until the end of 2020, a total of 39 ATMPs had got prime designation. So 48% of prime granted are for ATMPs. So in addition, maybe because I know that maybe you're all, well, maybe I don't know, but I'm sort of assuming that your audience is more US based than European based. So it's important that you're familiar with our innovation task force, with our scientific advice procedure, with Prime if you're eligible for Prime. Also, I'd like to mention the parallel scientific advice with health technology assessment bodies, because again, that can help us to bridge the understanding between the regulatory world and the payer world. And there's definitely a lot of education that needs to be done in that area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So ARM has now, Emer, about 380 member organizations globally, and about 20% of those are European. I think for this meeting, our meeting on the Mediterranean virtual, it's more European focused. So you'll probably have kind of 50-50, I think, or probably maybe 60-40 European audience. But in any event, I'm sure they'll appreciate understanding kind of the programs that you described. You know, I kind of asked about Prime and the toolbox in the context of CMC challenges, because I think our team and many of our members have been looking at that as potentially a really good example of ways to provide even further kind of clarification and guidance around CMC matters. Because as you've said, a lot of folks, I mean, on one hand, it's that there can be sponsors who are less familiar with traditional kind of manufacturing regulatory processes and standards. But also, I think we find there are a lot of these indications are in such small populations, and because of expedited approval pathways, often they just are arriving with a fairly limited amount of data, having gone through the development process quite quickly. And so the usual extended time that one has in a traditional process to get all these manufacturing comparability measures done and so forth, it's just so much different. So we kind of wanted to thank you for the development of not only Prime, but of the toolkit as we try to think about how to work with regulators around the world to help give appropriate guidance to sponsors so that they don't get hung up late in the process and stalled over CMC matters.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point, because we don't want to find there's a problem later on. We need to try and anticipate those problems earlier. And that's what the Prime scheme does, coming to us for scientific advice. Our innovation task force, we a lot of the issues are around also around scalability, and we can help with that as well. Consistency between batches, it's also a bit of an issue. And again, if we want to expedite the process, then we need to anticipate those challenges up front, rather than finding out as we get nearer to authorization that actually there isn't consistency, or there are potency problems, or we can't scale up or the company can't or cannot scale up the treatment. So this is we really want to help. And I think the other thing that I would highlight here is that we have a scheme for small and medium-sized enterprises to help with guide through the European regulatory process, but also to some entitlement for incentives, or there may be possibility for some incentives to be applied. So contact with our small and medium-sized office is something that I would also advocate for. And then, of course, if it's if it does meet orphan criteria, we have specific incentives in the orphan regulation as well, that are important. So it's a complex world. I mean, I think it's complex for everybody, but big companies invest a lot of time in a lot of time, energy, and resource in understanding all the possibilities that are available to them. And smaller companies sometimes find it a bit more challenging. And I know we probably take the complexity for granted, but I'm sure it's quite daunting for somebody coming to Europe for the first time.
So you talked a little bit earlier about clinical trials being one of the areas of challenge and opportunity for ATMPs. And as you may know, ARM and FPIA and Europa Bio have all called for an exemption to GMO requirements for certain clinical trials for ATMPs. We've done some analytical work around this, as have others, that show that the current GMO regulations do inhibit the clinical development of ATMPs, and they were designed really with something else entirely in mind. Do you have any comment on that particular issue? And is that a direction you might be interested in going when you talk about reforming clinical trials?
Well, I think it's very important to understand what we can and cannot do. So I fully understand the challenges that companies have, particularly as small companies, with the GMO regulations in Europe. But it's not something that the European Medicines Agency has any control of. This part of the legislation doesn't come under the mandate of the part of the commission that we work with. So what I would suggest is that you put the facts down and make it very clear that in not just in terms of the challenges with meeting the regulations, but why there are not risks associated with the type of GMOs. I mean, it is a different situation to a pesticide, for example, and as you said, the GMO regulations were set up for another reason, but strictly speaking, these do come within the scope of the regulation. So it's about helping people to understand the relative risk compared with the other type of interventions. But as EMA, it's not really something that we can do by ourselves. We can help. We understand, but it's not within our mandate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You also talked about your parallel scientific advice, and obviously you have worked for years together with HTA bodies. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience with that, with ATMPs in particular?
Yeah, so we started our work with the health technology assessment bodies in Europe in 2010. So, well, 11 years ago now. And I always say that I started in medicines regulation over 30 years ago, and the way I was brought up in the regulatory sense was it was all about quality, safety, and efficacy, and you never touched the economic dimension at all. It was the fourth. It was like an impure thought, for want of a better word. And I have to say, I've changed a lot now in that I think we have to. We've been working in parallel universes as opposed to in mutually understanding universes. So the work that, and it's my predecessors who've done it. Obviously, I'm not here that long, but I think it's been very important to start making the bridges between health technology assessment bodies and the regulatory processes. And what we've been trying to do in the parallel scientific advice is to see if by understanding what the health technology assessment bodies will want after authorization, we can get developers to build that into their initial trials, and that's what our parallel scientific advice has been about. So we've had 160 parallel scientific advices so far, of which only 14 have been for ATMPs. I was trying to understand why so few had been for ATMPs, because we will, if there's an interest, we will help to promote it. So we need to make sure that one, the ATMP developers are interested in pursuing this and that they understand the benefits, and two, that the health technology assessment bodies are ready to embrace it. And I think there's more work that we need to do there.
Mhm. Yeah, you talked about, the kind of significance of data, different kinds of data generally. Have you found in some of your experience to date in parallel review that you can really, identify places where, the common engagement resulted in a data set that came to the agency that minimized duplication or additional data collection that were needed by the HTAs?
Well, I have to say that I haven't that much personal experience with this so far, and not for ATMPs at all. But some of the examples that I've seen for other products is the question of endpoints, and what might be good as a regulatory endpoint is not what the payers are looking for in terms of an endpoint for whether they're going to reimburse the product or not. So that was a big, understanding that, for example, the survival time might not be what the payers were looking at, but that was what the regulatory endpoints were in oncology, for example, was actually did help influence how trials were designed, or started to influence how trials were designed. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that now. And you just have to have those conversations, because especially for advanced therapy products, because you're not really comparing like with like. What's your comparator? It's not usually another product. Might be, but it might be, that your this therapy will prevent X number of surgeries from now until, for how long, how. And so we have to think about how to have those conversations, as opposed to a product by product conversation, which is what the HTA discussions are often focused on.
Yeah, I think, kind of globally, we're still very much in the ATMP world where it's a very one by one conversation. There are many, especially on the HTA and payer side of things. There's not yet, there just haven't been enough. It's not systematized yet, and there haven't been systemic changes that make it easy to do. You have talked and worked a lot in your career, and you mentioned earlier kind of international harmonization efforts. I had the occasion to have a conversation with Dr. Marks recently, who was talking about, frankly, his disappointment that what had been a good, healthy amount of steam behind kind of international harmonization efforts between the FDA and EMA and other regulatory bodies, had to just by definition on their side take a back seat because of COVID. And he was hopeful about being able to reinvigorate those efforts. And they'd continued on obviously at a staff level, but without quite as much executive engagement as previously. Do you have any particular priorities with respect to international harmonization or collaboration in the ATMP space?
So yeah, I think we're ready for a boost. It comes in waves, and I do think we had started some conversations. We've had conversations obviously way back, because I think even in was it in 2002 when the first ICH guidance was under development, and then it was for various reasons, then it was put on hold, and then the discussion moved to an international regulatory perspective. So you had the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Forum starting to look at cell therapy and gene therapies more in sort of landscape mapping, definitions, legislative requirements. And I think some very valuable work was done there. But I think we need to get down to, well, what is it that makes the difference? What helps us? What stops us doing parallel trials? What makes us be able to have to be confident that the clinical trial that's done in one place will be supported. The clinical trials or the manufacturing standards or whatever will be supported elsewhere. And I think we have challenges because we have very different legislative frameworks, and I would say particularly in the US and the EU. And I've had many a conversation with Dr. Marks about this, and I think we both agree that neither is perfect, and but we have to live with what we've got. And there is a lot of scope for us to work closer together, but it does need, in addition to our technical leads, who I think do a fantastic job, and we have our cluster with FDA, and I think Health Canada is also involved in the cluster as well. We open participation of the CAT committee to some regulators that we have confidentiality arrangements with. But sometimes if we want to really move the international agenda forward, we have to put a targeted effort to see, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and how can we get to move in that direction. And I think I do agree that with the efforts that we're putting in COVID at the moment, while there is still a huge commitment to international alignment, maybe some of the same people are involved in or having to prioritize COVID for the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. You may be aware, we did an analysis of some of the areas of disharmony between EMA regulation of ATMPs and US regulation of ATMPs, and shared that with your team, tried to prioritize those things that at least the companies felt were having the greatest impact. So we would be happy to be kind of a partner with you. Your predecessor was also kind enough to invite us to speak at the International Coalition of Medicines Regulators meeting about some of the challenges of regulation in this space broadly, because I know, one of the issues is harmonizing regulation on both sides of the Atlantic, but there are also a lot of places that are still in the process of developing a framework at all. And obviously both the EMA and the FDA frameworks are good examples of that. So please consider us to be volunteer helpers in any way we can be in those efforts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I've taken over the chair of the International Coalition of Medicines Regulator authorities from my predecessor. And it is also true that a lot of our focus at the moment has been on COVID, but actually we've increased our day-to-day interactions and our and I would say our deliverables in the context of COVID. So I think it will be possible for us to move and refocus in the near future. And I actually was at that meeting where ARM presented on the challenges. I thought it was an excellent presentation. And I do think there are ways that we can explore in terms of addressing some of those challenges and differences.
You talked a little bit earlier, Emer, about the use of real world evidence and, the unique constellation of registries that you have in Europe. Can you talk about some of the work the EMA is doing to leverage that kind of data and how it might match up with some other initiatives in Europe, like the Health Data Space Initiative?
Yeah, so this is an area where we are investing huge investment at the moment with the EU Darwin oh my goodness, data analytics and real world interrogation network, Darwin EU. Which is going to be a federated system of where we work with different organizations to collect real world data and use it for decision making in the context of EU regulation. And we are convinced, and this will support the European health data space in the pharmaceutical area. So we expect with the legislation at the end of this year, we've got the support for some of these activities in the EMA's extended mandate proposal that's on the table at the moment. So we're going full steam ahead with setting this up, and we'll actually be going out with the tender within the next couple of months. So it's very clear to us that real world data will play a huge role in evidence generation in general, but in particular in where there are small populations like orphan medicines or advanced therapies. We think that there's a potential to play a much bigger role. It's something that the CAT has got on its work program for 2021. So we have an exploratory working project on how real world evidence can complement clinical trial results. So that's on the agenda of the or on the work plan of the in fact, most of our committees, but I just want to specifically identify the Committee for Advanced Therapies, but also because I think it's relevant also for the ARM network, also for the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, looking again about how real world evidence can be used to support the evidence generation, particularly in rare diseases. And just linking back to what I said previously about the importance of working with downstream decision makers such as HTA bodies and payers, we're investing in helping facilitate understanding of the power and potential of real world evidence. And we think that once we've moved a little bit further forward with with Darwin, that we'll be in a position to show some real results that will then move us from the rhetoric to to action.
Thank you. You know, from the perspective, I think from our perspective, you have a lot of advantages in terms of kind of the data infrastructure that exists in a lot of European countries compared to certainly the decentralized model in the United States. And as you said, kind of thinking about, you know, developing a real world evidence structure in rare or in ATMPs, you know, kind of a smaller subset of the universe of potential clinical trials, maybe a terrific way of getting going. And I know those are communities that, you know, in some ways it's a blessing that there are so many clinical trials underway, for example, in Duchenne's. On the other hand, you know, there are just not that many patients. And so being able to make sure that we can really leverage the data from each individual patient is, you know, so important for the field and for that community. So thanks for your efforts in that.
No, absolutely. But I think we're definitely going to see a lot more, particularly for rare diseases. We're going to see a lot more confidence and reliance on real world evidence or registries at the moment, but, you know, moving to actually doing some specific targeted studies based on healthcare systems, or based on subscribers who are helping us through this federated network that we're putting in place.
Terrific. Well, I think we have just a little bit of time left, but I did want to kind of recognize that, you know, that this has been a kind of powerful year for women in the world of biotechnology and advanced therapies, with obviously the Nobel Prize going to the two women, for the Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuelle Charpentier, for their discovery of CRISPR. You as the first female leader of the EMA, you know, we had women who were absolutely essential to the development of the vaccines currently in use for COVID. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what being the first woman head of the EMA means to you, kind of what your sense of the kind of opportunity at the EMA is for, in terms of equal opportunities, and any particular initiatives in that domain you're planning during your tenure?
Well, I'm the first woman, but that's 1 out of 4, so it's 25%. So yeah, if there's two out of 5, we're going to be up there. So I see it as a good start. I think we also have 60% of our staff are women, and the regulatory world is actually full of women leaders. I am proud to be part of that world. But if we look at our management board, is chaired by the head of the Austrian agency, who's a woman. We have I worked a lot with African regulators, and the ones who come to mind, you know, the head of the Ghanese FDA, the head of the Nigerian FDA, the head of the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. In Gamba, it's a woman as well. The head of Botswana is a woman. And I come from, my last 4 years before I came here was in WHO, where the leadership team has a very strong scientific, it has a strong proportion of women leaders in science. From a purely, so I think there's I don't think we're that badly represented in the regulatory and science front. I think part of what what I would, part of the message I'd like to give is, yes, we can. This is, yes, we can if we want, because it's. I think sometimes we don't have enough women in leadership positions, not because they can't, but because they don't choose to do so. And I, speaking from my own perspective, I wasn't, I wasn't sure that this was something I really wanted to do. I knew it was something I could do, but did I really want to do it? So I think um, we have to encourage women to come forward and to take up the challenge. I think there are lots of women women in our regulatory science field who can, and I think we have to turn it from can to want.
Thank you very much for that. It reminds me, I was speaking at one point with someone whose responsibility was to recruit women to run for public office in the United States. And she said that something very similar, that there's obviously no issue with capability, but often they don't just think of themselves in that role, that they kind of need to be asked to really get the consideration of thinking about it going. And that she found that was pretty different than her experience in recruiting male candidates who somehow didn't feel, just, it was a different dynamic on that side. So congratulations to you. And we're really excited to work with you and Anna and the men and women leaders at the EMA and in the regulatory environment to bring these exciting medicines to patients. We recognize you've got a lot of challenges to contend with, but I think we feel confident that building on our good and productive working relationship of the past, that we'll be able to solve some of the challenges in front of us, and that the effort is really, really going to be worth it, given the promise that these therapies do bring for patients. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to helping to move this agenda along.
Yeah, us too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.